Hi, welcome back to the Mom Mentality Show. My name is Austin Chadwick, co-host is Chris Lucian, and today we have Khaled Souf on the show, and we got some great topics lined up, jumping into test strategy for all those TDD practitioners out there like us, avoiding some traps that can occur with mob programming, and applying domain-driven design to legacy system and code is what we got before. So I'm excited to jump in. But before we do, can you introduce yourself for us in the audience?
Yes, sure. So my name is Khaled Souf. I'm actually, let's say, I call myself a globetrotter developer because I worked for many companies. I lived in 4 countries so far, and I lived in France, in Tunisia, and also in Canada, and then moved back to France, and then got to Switzerland. And right now, I'm actually in Switzerland. And I'm very passionate about subject about crafting software, about TDD, about extreme programming practice, and about domain-driven design.
Fantastic, fantastic. Yeah. Well, globetrotting, that sounds great. And I guess just jumping into our first topic, what has all your travels taught you about testing strategy for TDD? What are your thoughts here?
Well, actually, let's say that's one of the main topic that should be discussed when somebody is using TDD, especially in real life. The issue is like when some people try to do TDD, they learn TDD by katas, by coding dojos, by some kind of small exercise. But when they go to a bigger scale, like real life, big, let's say, application or maybe legacy application, it's very complicated to put that understanding and that new knowledge to practice. So in my experience, because also I've been coaching and mentoring multiple developers to do that in real life, one of the main struggle is actually testing strategy, because before using TDD in real life, you need to create some kind of testing strategy that's going to be compatible with TDD. So it's like I'm going to one thing, for example, is like you need to to define what is your unit test, what is a unit, how you're going to test it, how you create a faster feedback loop, and how to create testing, to make testing easier for developer. Because like, when you are a developer and you're trying to test something, if it is too hard, too complex to do it, at some point you're going to say, okay, I'm going to that, and I'm going to go, I'm going to do it like in what I call actually freestyling, like without test at all. So this is the thing that actually need to be done and prepared before doing that. So you need to create some kind of testing strategy, some kind of hierarchical testing, so you can be sure that it's going to be easier for you when you're going to start implementing features, or maybe fixing bugs in case of you are working with legacy code. So that's why I took this topic from many other topics to discuss today.
Oh, nice, nice. Yeah, and I think for me, I definitely will agree that going from a kata, like a very simple TDD, like FizzBuzz kata, to jumping into some existing code is a gigantic leap. So I agree with you there that strategy becomes very important. And I love that, to make it easy to test, to take away the friction of testing. What are some testing strategies, specific ones you have that help make it easy?
One of the things that, for example, I look into, there is something that you need to know when you are working with legacy code. Legacy code is actually very, very hard to test. Why? Because actually, when you take a small piece of code and you try to test it, because of the complexity of the dependencies, it's going to be very hard to test it. So what I'm usually do, if I'm in a new architecture, I'm going to use like the new, let's say, the new way of do it, like hexagonal architecture. One of the strategy that I use in hexagonal architecture is actually for the domain and for, the, let's say, the business layer. where you have the use case services, and when you have the domain object, I'm going to try to test them with as much as possible using, a fake strategy to fake the calls. And when I go, let's say, upper in the, let's say, in the layers, I'm going to try to use more slow tests and more of integration tests. So the basic thing is always, if I can fake or mock or maybe use a dummy, I'm going to try to use it. But if I found it too complex, I'm gonna go with the simplicity and make a trade-off and say, okay, I will not mock or maybe use a dummy for that part. I'm gonna test it as it is, and that's the trade-off that I'm gonna make, so it can be easier. Something else also that I use is like using outside-in techniques. So it's like I'm gonna start with the block that, let's say, expose something like REST API or something. Every time I'm gonna go deeper in the layers when I'm testing. These are actually the kind of techniques I use. And usually today, what I use, for example, for building an API REST, I'm gonna go from the consumer side and build the test before even build the backend side. So it's like, it's a technique that is called actually consumer-driven contract testing.
Yeah. So what kind of what kind of maybe resistance have you seen to unit? So is this more about a resistance from people adopting unit testing in their production code? And if so, what have you done to, I guess, convince people, or go deeper into the topic there? That
usually see the resistance is for the TDD as a technique itself. So okay. It's like, even I can go it go even further than that. So it's like the people, they are not convinced about that because like I said, maybe they had less knowledge or maybe they were not mentored. So it's like they know only the surface level. They try to do it. They found it too hard. So they make the conclusion that because it's too hard, so it's not applicable in our, let's say, space. So it doesn't work. So we not do it, go further. So usually what I do is like, I work with them in their code. So I can, something like pair programming or maybe ensemble programming when I do that for two reasons. The first one is actually to convince them about that, so they can see that it's actually working in real life. To like give them another perspective, because I don't know the project, so I'm like a new eye. I'm not actually somebody that go deeper, so I can take a step back and look differently to the code than them. Most of these people, they stayed like 10 years or 15 years in the same code. So they don't have that, that step back look. So they need somebody to do that. I'm not like, let's say I'm not in the position of teacher. I'm always, when I'm speaking to them, I'm like them. I'm still a developer. I'm still developing. So that you need to make, let's say, to make that clear in their mind, so they understand that you are in their side and you are a human being. You can make mistakes like them. You're not somebody who is like, going there and change everything. And people usually don't like to change their habits. Even if they're interested in what happens outside of their world, they usually afraid to do that because they are afraid to lose something, maybe to lose control, or maybe to because they're going to be some kind of naked to other people. So they don't like that kind of position. So you are there as a coach to reassure them that you are in their side, they are not alone, we're going to work together, we're going to get through that together, we are a team. And from there, usually it's going to be easier and easier. And I remember usually the people that are the most resistant, they do the most resistance at the end of the, of the coaching or something, they're going to be the one that leading the others to the new things.
Yeah. And I've seen that too. And it's almost like, I'm not sure if it is the Satir change model curve, but it feels very similar to it, where the first dip when you enter a code base and try to do TDD, especially when you're first learning it, it's a pretty big dip. And I think some of the things you said can really help. You're doing it with others. I'm not sure if you're pairing or mobbing with them or something, but it just even being present in the team in some fashion, I think that helps a lot. But what I've seen, I think you bring up a real challenge. It's almost like, what do they call that in diffusion of innovation? The chasm, right? Crossing the chasm. I feel like there's a similar chasm with TDD, where when the difficulty gets hard, many don't persist through. Because often when I have seen people persist through, they come out as champions on the other side. But there are many who also give up before you get through that. And so I really like this topic of how do we make the dip less hard? Like, huge, this huge dip, this huge chasm. And I think you mentioned one term that maybe you can define it for me, because you mentioned consumer-driven contract testing. Do you mind describing that a little bit more?
Yeah, that's actually a technique that I heard a lot from one of the author of Growing Object-Oriented Software Guided by Test. And I think it's Nate Price, if I remember the name. And actually, he was talking about that as an evolution of TDD. So I've took it, like every, let's say, TDD practitioner, I was curious about that like a few years ago. And then I started looking to that. What are the tools? How do we use it? How is it working? And I'm actually, let's say, fall in love with that technique. So how it works actually is like, right now there is a tool that is called Pact.io. You can look onto it. So the thing is, you have your, let's say, your front end. It can be anything. It can be, let's say, using some kind of like Angular or maybe Vue.js or any kind of stuff. And when you try to call something that is in the backend, like REST API, you're going to use some kind of, in your tests, you're going to use some kind of mock, or you're going to use some kind of stubbing, or maybe, let's say, faking. So when you do that, let's say, mock gonna generate some kind of contract. That kind of contract is looked like a file. So it's when I call that thing, I'm gonna receive that result in that structure, in that kind of structure. And that contract, you can take it to the provider, so to the backend side, and it's gonna generate tests to the provider. So you're gonna validate it. And if you have like multiple, let's say, consumers, you can have one provider for multiple consumers, and that provider gonna validate all the contracts by generate dynamically the tests. And it's gonna test all the backend as a whole, not a small piece of that.
Yeah.
So that's actually the idea. We have a contract. I'm the consumer, so I'm providing the contract, and you're gonna, as a provider, you're gonna try to validate it. And that contract can be the starting point to all the implementation after that. So it's like, let's say, it's not a TDD double loop, it's like the third loop or the fourth loop or the TDD multiple loops, actually.
Gotcha. Okay, right on. Yeah, thanks for that explanation. And yeah, and have you seen that help, ease it, or is it because you were? I think you brought it up because you were going up higher up the stack. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, and I guess I'll return to one dichotomy here because it's been a passionate topic for me lately. Um, and this might be a contrary opinion, but I invite the back and forth here. So I have been burned so bad by slow tests that I am almost willing to pay any cost to not make the test slow. And so, and I guess what's the trade-off for you? Like, when do you say like it's okay to have a slower test here? Like
Okay,
when,
so
yeah, like what's your personal take on that one?
okay, I'm gonna talk about a very old experience of mine when I started using TDD.
Yeah.
I've been in a project like 8 years or 9 years ago, or even 10 years. I don't remember the year exactly. So it's like we starting using TDD, we using TDD double loop, we use it, behavior-driven development also. And at some point, when you try to push something, they're gonna run the build pipeline, and it takes like 13 minutes to get the feedback. So it's like was actually hellish. Let's say it that way. So it's like in the day you can do like 4 or 5, or even you run the build, you grab a coffee, you can talk to all your colleagues, and the build didn't finish yet. So it's like so the thing that I understood from that experience is actually sometimes testing and TDD, especially when using TDD for testing, is going to be a very good indicator that there is already an issue, but it's going to make it bigger. That's the thing. So it's like there is an issue. Maybe you don't see it right now, but it's going to make it bigger. So when you have that kind of build, I think usually you have a problem with your design. So it's like you need maybe to split it in multiple modules, or maybe multiple applications, or maybe there is some few. It can be a modular monolith or something. So there we go to the DDD side. When we start to have some kind of bounded context, you need to split them. It can be in the same application, or also it can be multiple application in the case that you're going to use like techniques like architectures like microservice, or even going serverless. But you can still also manage that kind of issue with a modular monolith. When you do that, you can make your tests, let's say, run in parallel, and you're going to remove that issue. What I'm trying to say is, like, sometimes when you get an issue, it's an indicator that there is a problem elsewhere, and you need to look into it. It reminds me actually of another issue that we had, and we've been looking, and we've been saying that maybe there is something that we need to do about it. I remember when we are using behavior-driven development, and we use it, one of the many, let's say, framework that you use it for testing, especially when you have a BDD as a specification. So at some point, you're going to need to implement it. And one of the biggest framework is actually Cucumber. And we've been using Cucumber for that. And at some point, we stopped using BDD at all. Why? Because one of the business person doesn't like the way that we are writing it. It was always repetitive. There is always, let's say, we are saying the same sentences. And every time we create that file, we're trying to building together. It was like some kind of routine. And it's like some kind of machine. There is no actually reflection on that. And from that, I understand that we were only taking consideration of what us developers are saying, not actually the business are saying. So it was like, it doesn't actually BDD is means of conversation. So it's like we missed completely the point. And sometimes I don't find, let's say, that when I'm working, usually when I reflect after few months or something, that I can take a step back and say, okay, so I think we did that wrong, or maybe I did that wrong, and then we need to do something about it next time.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about too. I've seen that before. We were actually talking about in my ensemble recently, where there's so many nice testing frameworks, and Cucumber is one of them, where it lets you write in regular language, like plain English, with spaces and everything, like the name of your test. But yet you'll still see some tests that are like test function call sends parameters correctly, and it's kind of like like that is not, that does not capture the domain, right? And so even if you have all the tools that are ready to make it capture the domain, it still takes the humans to have the conversations and capture that, right? So I totally agree. How about maybe it's a good time to transition topics. So you mentioned, helping, ease that difficult start to TDD on a new code base, and being there with them and coaching them. And and so it sounds like you've tried some ensemble programming and mob programming. And what are some traps you've seen that should be avoided?
Well, there is many ones. Let's start with the biggest one that I found is like the problem actually when you are doing ensemble programming, if you don't create some kind of safe space for people, let's say the shy one, the introvert one, they will not participate on that as actively as the others. And in the same also, let's say in the same way, the loud people, they're going to be even louder and louder. So it's like they're going to take the whole space for themselves. So it's like it's a very, very big issue in my side, especially when you do it without some kind of constraint, without some kind of let's say, what I say is like some kind of restriction, so we can be sure that everybody is happy about that, everybody is participating, everybody is sharing their knowledge, and also everybody is learning something. And this is one of the biggest trap that I've seen. So it's like no, let's say no restriction at all. I didn't find the word that need to say in this case, but let's say create a safe context. That's very, very important for that. For people. I can give you an example. If you, for example, you don't, use some kind of technique to time box the things so the people, they can switch, there is always going to be the same person taking the keyboard, and the same person also, let's say, giving instruction to that person, because, they're passionate about it. Maybe they like to do that. But at some point, they're going to take their cell phone, and they're starting losing completely interest on ensemble programming.
Yeah, different behaviors. I've seen different variations on that. Depending, some people might get excited, or maybe one person just knows a whole lot, so like one general restriction I like to lean on is, at the end of the week, did everyone speak a roughly equal amount of time? So that's kind of a little bit of a kind of retrospective thought experiment to get people to kind of choose to do, add constraints to their ensemble. Do you have any particular strategies to adding those restrictions, and what might they be?
Well, one thing is actually I'm using rendering. It's like switching people every 5 or 8 minutes, so you can be sure that everybody is there, and also restricting the number of people they can do mobbing. So it's like, in my opinion, if it is more than 5 people, it's going to be very complicated. You're going to lose some people, that's for sure. And between 3 and 5. And 5 is actually already too much, in my opinion. So it's like, this is one of the 2 restrictions. time, let's say the number of people, also the way they are doing it. So it's like somebody need to share the screen, and also if let's say the navigator, or the let's say the navigator the navigator is actually the one that is telling people what to do, if I remember well. That person shouldn't take decision without consulting the others. That's one of the main topic. If you're gonna take a big decision and tell the one that is coding to do it, he need to check with the others, and he need to go forth and back with them, so they can tell him what to do, and tell him, let's say, try to give him some kind of insight. He shouldn't take the decision alone. They are 5 people, or maybe 4 people, or 3 people, so nobody should take the decision alone for the whole team. And that's actually a very very good thing to do. What are the other traps? You can also, the other traps is like taking, instead of doing small steps, taking very big steps, like taking more than 30 minutes, without any kind of I always try to get some kind of break or something like that, so people can take a look back and then go back, so they can see what actually happened, and are they okay with that. So you need always to, let's say, to avoid the tunnel effect, going on. Everybody's like focusing on the same stuff, but you need already somebody to take a step back. So that's why I always doing that in very, very small iteration. It's like between, let's say, at most it's like 25 minutes, no more than that.
Yeah. And it's a super interesting topic, and I think there's so much nuance, and I think I really like what you said at the beginning. Kind of the goal is a safe space, and I think there's multiple ways to get there, and in some cases it'll be exactly what you said, Chris, where it is like strictly everyone is speaking almost exactly at the same time. I've also seen mobs observed where there is someone who's more of a talker, but there is lots of space left for others. So there's lots of moments of silence. There's lots of engagement. Everyone is still weighing in. And some people don't prefer to talk as much as well. And so it's finding that balance, so it's always the tricky thing, right? Because you don't want to over constrain it, right? Because there could be some mobs that have no constraints and the safety is very high, right? And then, so if you add constraints to that, I could see it leading to problems. So it's very context based, right? And so
exactly.
Yes, exactly. And so, but I do have to agree with you. If I'm going to set up a mob and I don't know a lot about what's going on, yeah, I'm going to have a timer and I'm going to have a small amount of people. So I'm totally with you there. And I think the small amount of people, I've seen big mobs do really well. And, but I think it's more challenging. And I think it's just, the difficulty of a lot of people in general in communication, right? And so with 3 people, you get the diversity, 3 to 4 people, you get the diversity of opinion, right? Going on, because, with 4 people, there'll be 6 opinions, because I'll have at least 2 or 3 and I'll disagree with myself. But, and you can go back and forth and complete a whole conversation loop, right? Like someone has a concern, we can walk through their concern and talk through all the details and figure it out. And then everyone else can learn around that. When it starts getting like 8, 9 people, there's no way to sync everyone's understanding and walk through all their concerns, at least in a detailed level. I think, like you said, you like, if I find myself where I'm like, well, if I speak my mind here, we'll never get anything done, because we'll just be taking turns discussing every person's issue. And so I am tempted to check out more the higher the number. And so I agree, it can work, but I agree with you. A smaller number is a better subset. Any response, either of you, to some opinions there?
Yeah, I typically go to the example of well, I typically like the law of personal mobility, and you know, if you're not contributing and you're not learning, then go to a different mob or
Yeah.
ensemble. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I think you know that's in the context of you have enough people to kind of split and have others join. And then also, I think if you're like kind of scaling up, is this growing and splitting idea. So I totally think a an ensemble of 6 people is appropriate if you're getting ready to split into 2 groups of 3 to then add more people. So I think in the context of like scaling a team, I think a temporary 6-person ensemble is a really good thing to have. And I also think that in the case of a big unknown and a lot of like popcorning of ideas, if there's a lot of people engaged, I've seen very large ensembles happen where a lot of people have the researcher role in many cases researching in different directions. So I think if you can have as many people really as the number of research directions go as people are popcorning ideas. So you know the example I lean on often for this is a 20-person ensemble trying to work with a quantum computing API for the first time. So people researching physics and how quantum computing works, and as well as the Python API, as well as the syntax for what they're trying to do. So I think it can scale up, but it shouldn't if, you know, especially with the learning and contributing. So I think in that case, everybody's kind of learning or contributing. The disengagement, I think, happens when people feel like they can't do that. So yeah.
So it's like it's very interesting what you are saying, because I totally agree with you. One of the big ensemble programming that I've seen working is actually when people, they split that kind of task. So it's like they are taking very different roles. In that case, it's actually working because everybody is actually taking responsibility or accountability for what he's doing. It's like everybody is waiting for him to do something. Especially when they are researching, I remember that happened. Somebody is looking for the documentation on the API. The other one is actually trying to design the architecture. And, you know, what are you doing? How is it going? What do you think? Well, I think that we should do that, because that. And it's actually like you said, it's like the idea is they are popping, and it's very interesting when, you know, and it's very also, when you see that, is like you see a company scaling actually, because when you scale a company, you're going to have less general, let's say, profiles. You're going to have more specialized profiles. So it's like, it's like creating a company in real life. So it's like, it's really interesting. I've seen that multiple times. So this is actually the case that it is working very well actually, because everybody is actually looking for something to help others. So it's like they have a common goal, we have a common goal, and we're trying to achieve it and everybody is thinking what I can add to the others, so we can be it's going to be easier to achieve that common goal.
Yeah, I love it. And I don't know, I just had, when you were speaking, something fired in my head that I wanted to throw at you guys, because I think it's what you're talking about is, you know, I've always thought about lean flow efficiency from like an organization perspective, you know, like between teams or between people, or from like a value stream map. But I don't know if I've ever thought about it internally within an ensemble, right? And it almost seems like, Khaled, that's what you were explaining, was that an ensemble is doing well if there's no like queuing and waiting or waste happening inside, right? So everyone is contributing, and they're not, like, in a sense, you're always waiting for maybe the driver or navigation. But if you can research without waiting, then you're not having the lean waste of waiting, right? If the communication is flowing, there's not like a transportation waste, so to speak. And I don't know, it's in the primitive brainstorming for me, but I think there's something to that. So if you could maybe have a very large mob, but its lean virtues are very high. And if the lean virtues are not high and you're having a lot of waste, maybe that's the time to split. Yeah. So yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
you said. Actually, I'm going to add some kind of point that
Sure.
something that you said before. When you said about the constraint, that sometimes you say that maybe it depends on the context. Actually, I totally agree with you on that, because what I usually do is, like, I'm pushing the idea with the freestyling mobbing ensemble programming, and from there I'm gonna look to the people. If I find that everything is okay, I will not give them any constraint, because they don't need it. So it's like any organization. If there is no issue, you will not need some kind of laws, right? But if there is issues rising, so you're gonna try to regulate that, like any let's say country or something. So when they try to issue a law, there is always something that happened before. So that's why there is a law right now. So this is how I actually see it. Sorry, you can go ahead.
No, that's great. I love that. And then that's actually I think that's my style too, I would say. I usually, if it's people I don't know and I have no context, we usually start with the constraint of the timer, right? But you're right. I definitely lean towards the low direction and only add as needed. But yeah. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, it is as needed, I think.
Yeah, you're Mr. Chaos. So
yeah.
Yeah, me and Chris's discussion usually is if we're facilitating a workshop or something we're mobbing, it's, I'm like, okay, here are the constraints, and you're like, oh, just throw them in there, and they'll figure it out.
Often it's like, well, I find like there's a lot of opportunities for just impromptu coaching and other things like that kind of come out of natural, because I think in the past I've seen like a lot of assumptions that I might make about what people might struggle with or not, and sometimes I'm totally wrong. And so I think often I've seen coaching work really well where the mistake has just happened and then you can jump in and say like, oh, wasn't that painful? Let's like try a different way. And so that has been a particular big one. And in fact, to going back to the team size or the ensemble size thing, I've gone into like very like lethargic ensembles before. And it's like, oh, hey, like, does anybody feel like they're not learning or contributing right now? And a few people will be like, yeah. And they'll be like, this is a really good opportunity to just break away. And so that I think inherently, I think people don't want to be disruptive or come off as rude. And so I think often it's like the giving the permission to split off, actively from a coaching standpoint really helps, because I see people want to keep the ensemble together too long often, when they could split off and do something else, or go from a 6 to a 3 and 3. And in that scaling example, I've seen the 6 work really well because everybody's learning, and as the learning tones down and as its flow increases, probably like a production related flow increases, then you naturally go into that, okay, let's split up, but people feel like it's being rude to split up. And so I think paying attention to politeness, like being overly polite, is actually, I think, an anti-pattern in ensemble, when because we talk about being polite, right, or kindness, consideration, and respect, but it's not kind, considerate, or respectful to be polite to the extent that the ensemble slows down its total capacity, right?
Yeah, kind and direct. Yes.
Yeah.
Cool. We're coming up a little bit close on time, but I don't know if you wanted to get out a sound bite on DDD, domain-driven design applied to legacy stuff. So what's your thoughts there?
Well, actually, it's like one of the topic that, let's say, most of the people that are using domain-driven design avoid, because they avoid usually legacy. Why? Because there is no excitement about like creating a new knowledge. It's like some kind of archaeology in my opinion. So it's like, you know, you got a big pyramid and you got a pharaoh there, and you are digging to get to that, you know, to that tomb or something. Actually, it's like most of the people who they are working with legacy, they don't care much about the business side, because they always like trying to fix bugs, they are in the critical side. So it's like, I don't want to know about that. I need to fix my bug. I need to understand the code, but I don't want to understand the business area. But actually, the most important thing is actually the business area. So that's why the best thing is actually trying to applicate domain-driven design and legacy, because it's going to be very, very helpful, especially when you create a bug. You know that that's actually a bug, and it's going to be something that they're going to be painful for people when they are using the application, because you know exactly how the application should behave. That's one thing that actually domain-driven design, when it is applied in legacy system, going to be helpful for as a developer. The other thing also is like the issue with legacy system is like the lost knowledge. So somebody has done that, understand very well the business, but at some point there is a turnover in the company, that person is actually moved to another company, or there is something else. So you lose that kind of knowledge, and it creates some kind of fear to change anything on the application. So these are actually the thing that domain-driven design can be very, very, very helpful to that.
Yeah, and I think I'll throw it in there that that's something I've been noticing quite a bit while ensembling is, what domain are we leaving on the table that wasn't put into the code that's going to evaporate and disappear, and it's gone. And it might even be gone tomorrow or in an hour, right? Because it's like, oh, we fixed it. Like you're saying, the bug, we just fixed it. Now we understand what the problem is. We know how to fix it. And then what often it feels easy, because you just like have that moment of relief, like, okay, we're done. But actually, if you walk away, then you're all that knowledge is going to evaporate unless you capture it, right? Yeah, into the code. And so I think timing is really important as well. Like if the kind of refactor step to bake that in happens too late, you'll forget, you know. And so it's good to have that tight loop with it. And so yeah, I totally agree. And it almost seems like domain-driven design feels like this pie in the sky, great for greenfield, but you know, when you're in the weeds, it's actually very, very useful of legacy systems. I totally agree. Yeah.
All right. Well, this might be a good time to close things out. But before we do, would you like to maybe share or plug anything before we close the show up?
Well, actually, there is something that I'll add about TDD. I hope we have enough time to do it.
Yeah.
So actually, the thing that happens before when I'm using it in legacy, it's like one of the things is like you said, Dustin, is like you know, you get that knowledge right now, and then at some point, poof, it evaporates. The other thing also that I understood is actually when you, let's say, you redo your understanding of the business, sometimes at some point you're gonna have some kind of shift, like the let's say the knowledge from some place to another. So it's like everybody is focusing in some part, thinking that is the main business thing, the main value of the app or the legacy system. And then at some point you say, actually, it is not, is actually most of the business people or the user, they are using another part. One of the example that I can give is actually about Slack. the company Slack. I think everybody knows about it. So Slack, before creating that product, they were a video gaming company, and then they created that channel as actually something that something that is going to be supporting the video game that they are playing. But actually, at some point, they understood that the main value is actually in that actually channel and in that Slack that we call right now. So they shifted completely their business model.
Wow. What a story. Yep.
All right. Well, yeah. So, thank you for the discussion, and to our audience, if if you know somebody that maybe could use more information on TDD and crossing the chasm with TDD, or maybe experiencing some anti-patterns in Ensemble programming, or maybe needs more depth on domain-driven design, then please share this episode with them. And as always, like and subscribe, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Austin, for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.